Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in celebrating the launch of the 2019 edition of the National Footprint and Biocapacity Accounts. I'm Laurel, CEO at Global Footprint Network. Today, in addition to celebrating the launch of the latest data, we are also celebrating sustainability solutions. In a few minutes, I will introduce our panel of experts, but first I'd like to give you all a very brief crash course on our work. One fundamental requirement for sustainability is to demand less from our planet than the planet's ecosystems can renew. Ecological footprint accounting focuses on this very requirement. Based on UN statistics, it tracks human demand on ecosystems in comparison to what ecosystems can renew. And when that demand exceeds renewal, we find ourselves in what is called ecological overshoot. Ultimately, this leads to the degradation of natural capital, eroding economic and social welfare. Ecological footprint accounts link our planetary context to countries, cities, and individuals' decisions. Since the early 1990s, these detailed accounts have been the leading metric to evaluate one planet compatibility of projects, cities, and countries. They track this by adding up all the biologically productive land and water areas a person, project, or population uses to produce the resources it consumes, to house its infrastructure, and to absorb its waste, given prevailing technology and resource management practices. Of particular interest in this calculation is the carbon footprint, which makes up roughly 60% of the total ecological footprint. The National Footprint and Biocapacity accounts track footprint and biocapacity for over 200 countries and regions going back to 1961. This year, the results are available through 2016. 2 more years than last year's edition, thanks to additional years of data available through our United Nations sources. One key finding in the new edition is that humanity's carbon footprint dropped 1.4% between 2014 and 2016, bringing the total ecological footprint down 0.5% over the same time period. But before we get too excited about that, more recent data significant carbon increases throughout 2017 and 2018 suggest that this trend may have been short-lived. To dig deeper into these trends and much more, you can check out all of the results from the 2019 edition available on the Ecological Footprint Explorer, our open data platform at data.footprintnetwork.org. In our work at Global Footprint Network, we have identified 4 key areas that have been paramount in defining our long-term trends, each of which is shaped by our individual and collective choices. First is cities, how we design and manage cities, including how we move ourselves around. Second is energy, how we power ourselves, where that energy comes from. The third is food, how we produce, distribute, and consume food. And fourth is population, how many of us there are. So to discuss sustainability in light of these 4 pillars, we are joined today by an esteemed group of panelists who have done incredible work in each of these 4 areas. First, I'd like to introduce Alicia Graves. Alicia leads strategy, development, and advocacy for the OASIS initiative and is the president of Venture Strategies for Health and Development, a nonprofit organization aiming to help stabilize global population by securing women's freedom to choose their family size. She is a research fellow for Project Drawdown, our partners, analyzing the potential contribution of family planning for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Thanks for joining us, Alicia.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Stephen Finn. Steve leads Leanpath teams in helping clients take control of their food waste, reducing waste and costs while engaging employees to institute a culture of food waste prevention. He co-founded Response Ecology, a sustainability and change management firm helping organizations reduce waste and drive transformational culture change. He's also done extensive research on food security, water security, and global food waste, and has developed public-private partnerships to capture and redistribute excess food to mitigate hunger. Steve teaches at University of Pennsylvania and writes about food at foodforthoughtfulaction.com. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Next, we have Emily Fritzi. Emily manages strategic partnerships, business development, and programming for Powerhouse, an incubator and accelerator that supports entrepreneurs building the future of energy. She supports Powerhouse Ventures pipeline development and post-investment portfolio support. Previously, she was a senior director for energy and environment in the Office of Cabinet Affairs for Energy and Environment at the White House. Thanks for joining us, Emily. And last but not least, we have Tom McGuire. Passionate about using his experience in planning, engineering, policymaking, and management to build great cities, Tom directs San Francisco's Metropolitan Transit Authority's ambitious efforts to achieve Vision Zero. His Sustainable Streets team operates, engineers, designs, and plans the city's traffic, parking, pedestrian, and bicycle infrastructure, and provides transit security and parking enforcement. Previously, Tom served as an assistant commissioner at the New York City Department of Transportation, where he oversaw bus rapid transit, freight mobility, peak rate parking, and alternative fuels programs. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, with no further ado, I think we can just jump right into these questions. So the first question I have for all of you is, as we think about sustainability, you are all doing this amazing work. And so I would love to hear, what is the ultimate outcome of your work, what your organization is striving to achieve? And what does that look like in terms of concrete projects on the ground? So Steve, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Laurel. Great question. At Leanpath, we've been working to prevent food waste at scale for 15 years. And in fact, this week you can see a video release about our experiences, our 15th birthday, actually. So we're excited about that. The ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve is reflected in our vision and in our mission. Our mission is to ensure a sustainable future by eliminating global food waste. And our mission is to make food waste prevention and measurement everyday practice in the world's kitchens. We think big. We're in over 2,000 locations today. We have a goal to be in 100,000 kitchens by 2030. And we see food and food waste as lying at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals, central and critical. We know that the food system is a huge driver of environmental and social costs, including air pollution, water pollution, deforestation, soil depletion, biodiversity loss, and more. If you think about these amazing statistics, I think everybody's heard about, if food waste were ranked as a country, it would be the third largest emitter of global greenhouse gas emissions behind the US and China. The embedded energy in food waste equates to 2% of energy consumption in the US. In terms of water, food waste accounts for 24% of water used for global agriculture. That's 45 trillion gallons. So these are amazing statistics. And so they kind of define the value of working in this area. At Leanpath, we know that the world can't continue to waste up to 50% of food annually. It's simply unsustainable. And a huge driver of this is our current global food system, which includes such a vast amount of overproduction. That's why we operate at the top level of the EPA hierarchy on prevention, also known as source reduction. This is the point of maximum impact. So by preventing food waste, we avoid all the resources that would otherwise have gone into the production of that food and all the associated environmental costs and all the social costs as well. So we enable the preservation of resources. We enable other resources such as human labor and capital to be reallocated to other issues such as root cause solutions. So we prevented over 35 million pounds of food waste in the past 5 years. And we're now proud of the fact that we're preventing 1 pound of food waste every 2 seconds. So our impact is rising rapidly. We look forward to even bigger impact in the next 15 years on this incredibly important issue.
That's fantastic work. Could you just really quickly, who is your primary client then for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, we operate in a number of sectors. Core customers at the enterprise level would be Google, would be IKEA, Aramark, Sodexo. So large food service organizations, and we're in multiple sectors: hospitality, healthcare, colleges and universities, gaming, that sort of thing.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Emily, could you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Sure. So I work at Powerhouse. Powerhouse is an incubator and a venture fund based in Oakland. We house in our space clean energy entrepreneurs and organizations that are working to build a future of energy that's decentralized, decarbonized, digitalized, and democratized. We also have a venture fund, Powerhouse Ventures, where we invest in the next generation of clean energy companies, mostly software and digital technologies that are helping enable this transition. And since we started about 4 years ago, we've housed over 60 startups in our space. We invested in 17 through an accelerator we ran, and then through the new venture fund, we've invested in 5. And we'll make 20 to 25 more investments in early stage clean energy companies over the next 4 years. And of course, while these are very early companies, our hope, and we're starting to see that these companies are going to have a huge impact in energy, clean electricity, and clean transportation, and clean industrial sectors, and hopefully a huge impact on global greenhouse gas emissions in the years to come.
There's some really exciting things going on with what I've heard from the group, or I guess the entrepreneurs coming out of Powerhouse. Is there one that you could highlight that is maybe an example of what kind of work happens there?
Yeah, it's hard to just choose one, but a good example is we just invested in a company called Leap. They've developed a software marketplace that is allowing distributed energy resources. So think like electric vehicles, solar, distributed batteries and storage, to bid into wholesale electricity markets where they don't individually meet enough of a threshold in order to participate in those electricity markets. And so what they're doing is opening up a whole new way for us to integrate this increasing amount of solar and electric vehicles and distributed assets, clean assets onto the grid, which will be hugely important as this area of energy continues to grow.
That sounds like really exciting stuff. I think Leap will be someone to look out for in the years ahead.
Yeah, definitely.
So Tom, can you speak a little bit about the work that you are doing and some projects you've got going on?
Sure, thank you. So I work, I think I'm the one person here who works in the public sector. I work for the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, and we are a multimodal agency that operates and oversees all ground transportation in San Francisco. We're the city's parking and traffic department, we're the taxi commission, and we're also the 8th largest transit operator in the United States. We run the system called Muni. If you've been to San Francisco, I'm sure you've ridden Muni. So we're a big organization, about $1 billion operating budget, $5 billion capital program, about 5,000 employees. And San Francisco is unique in that about 20 years ago, we combined our transit, traffic, and taxi functions into a single multimodal transportation agency because we think that all transportation services in the city do need to be managed in a holistic, comprehensive way. And that has important implications for sustainability. In 1973, our voters made the city's official transportation policy transit first. So you asked us what our goals or our guide stars are. Our number one goal in San Francisco is to make mass transit the best way to get around the city. And this is in a city where we know that cars and trucks and the transportation sector in general, but especially cars and trucks, still have a disproportionate impact on our greenhouse gas production and our local air quality. The second key goal we have, and the thing that's really the focus of my work day to day, is our goal of Vision Zero. San Francisco is the second city in the United States, and we've been followed by many others, to declare in 2014 that all traffic fatalities are unacceptable. We treat them as preventable, and our goal is to make the streets just as safe for pedestrians, cyclists, and folks on foot as they are for people in cars. And those two goals of making walking and cycling safe connect and are deeply intertwined with our goal to make transit the best way to get around.
That's fantastic. I will attest as a Bay Area resident that I would prefer to go by public transit than any other way to get around. So I think something's going right. So finally, Alicia, could you speak a little bit about the work that you're doing and maybe some concrete examples of what you're trying to achieve?
Yes, thank you. So I run a nonprofit organization based in Berkeley, California called Venture Strategies for Health and Development. And we aim to help stabilize the global population by the end of the century. We know that the UN estimates range very widely from almost 7 billion to over 16 billion by the end of the century. And we are currently at about 7.5 billion. And so the choices that we make in the coming decades will have major effects on the future population of Earth. There are, so the way in which we're going about this is I have a few things I'd like to mention. One of them is kind of the population factor. It's trying to raise awareness about population and how it's affected and its effects on the Earth. We're also trying to work to separate links between having sex and having children. So we have a project called Optio that's very active in Central America, and it's making sure that women have reproductive health options and can have access to family planning methods as well as safe abortion in the region. We also have an initiative called the OASIS initiative, which I'm very much involved in. I helped found it as a project of UC Berkeley and now also run it through my organization. OASIS stands for Organizing to Advance Solutions in the Sahel. The Sahel is an ecological region of Africa. It's basically the southern border of the Sahara Desert, and it includes some of the poorest countries in the world. It has some of the highest fertility rates and the fastest growing populations in the world. Of course, these countries have contributed negligible amounts to climate change, but they are and will continue to be affected disproportionately on things such as, especially around food security and access to water and arable land. So the OASIS initiative, like venture strategies, we're aiming to catalyze a demographic transition, which means bringing down fertility rates, but especially by upholding girls' rights to stay in school and not be married as children, and women's rights to have access to family planning. So that's a bit about what we're doing. I wanted to say that both the girls' education and the family planning pieces are really important, and I helped Project Drawdown with some of the analysis about how those two approaches could affect the global population between now and mid-century. And our calculations are that together they could contribute to reducing by over 100 million gigatons CO2 emissions by mid-century. So they're very powerful levers on climate change and also, like I said, basic human rights for girls and women.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you for the work, explaining the work that you're doing. It's really fascinating. And I think it's also fascinating the different ways that as different sectors that you each work in, I feel like that there is such interesting complements and overlaps. So you can't really talk about transportation without talking about energy. You can't talk about population without talking about food security. So there's definitely, I think, really interesting pieces of all of that. Speaking of Project Drawdown, a few years ago during our Earth Overshoot Day campaign, which is the day of the year when we have used all of the natural resources that the planet will produce over the entire year, we took a bunch of drawdown data and we translated it into number of days that we could move the date if different solutions were implemented. And if you, based on drawdown numbers, if empowering women and girls would result in moving Overshoot Day 30 days by 2050, which I think is a really interesting stat.
That's fantastic.
So speaking of also of translating data, as an organization, we are obviously very data focused. It is a big piece of who we are. So folks, how do you use data in your work? Is it either to diagnose problems that you want to solve, to measure impact? But I being a data geek myself and coming from our very data geek focused little global footprint network, I'd love to hear from each of you how data is important in the work that you do. So this time, let's start with Emily. Can you talk a little bit about how you use data at Powerhouse?
Sure. So I think actually the most exciting thing is that advanced grid controls and sensors that are now available, technology has resulted in an immense amount of data that's now being used to create new solutions. And we're investing in a lot of those. So we geek out on all of the increasing amount of data in energy that people now have access to, who are creating solutions to help deploy clean energy in the US and globally. So it's worth, a good example is we invested in a company called Station A, who has basically scrubbed all sorts of data on permits and interconnection in order to create a software platform that allows a whole host of customers to automate clean energy project development so that we can deploy more clean energy and we can identify better sites to install clean energy. So that's a really exciting example of how data and analytics is being unleashed in ways it never has before in the energy sector, not only to create a smart grid, but also to open up market opportunities for clean energy deployment. At Powerhouse, though, we also use data frequently. One, as we assess investments, we want to make sure that we're investing in exciting technology, that if it works, it will matter, that there are market opportunities for this technology to be deployed and have an impact on global greenhouse gas emissions and clean energy. And then we also collect individualized data and metrics for each of our portfolio companies around kilowatts deployed or gigawatts, megawatts or gigawatts deployed of clean energy project, number of clean energy projects enabled, jobs created, etc. So various data and metrics are collected that measure specific impact for each of the companies that we invest in.
I love how concrete all of that is. There's a lot of great ways that you can turn that around and have it so actionable so quickly. Thanks, Emily. So next, actually, can we go to Tom? Can you talk a little bit about how you all are using data in San Francisco?
Sure. Well, I think our sustainability programs proceed from the unfortunate reality that in our city, 40% of our greenhouse gas production comes from the transportation sector. And we know that even more specifically, it's not coming from buses or trains. Almost all of that is coming from cars and trucks. And so that key insight tells us that the single most important thing we need to do for air quality and to reduce our carbon footprint is to reduce the number of cars and trucks on the road. We also know that helps us achieve not just environmental goals, but it helps us improve the city's economic performance by reducing congestion. And it frankly helps us bridge some of the increasing social divides. San Francisco, unfortunately, is a city that is trending in the direction of more social inequality, not less. So putting that in terms of goals, we set a goal for ourselves in the previous decade of moving at least half the trips in San Francisco by some mode other than the private car. And we believe we achieved that in 2016. We do a survey every year of a representative sample of San Franciscans, and we believe that we crossed that 50% threshold of people moving by mass transit, biking, walking, or carpooling in 2016. So we're not content with 50%. We've now set ourselves a goal of 80% by the end of the next decade, and that's a big jump forward because our transit system, we don't have enough seats on our buses and trains to carry that number of people, and we don't have enough bike lanes to move that number of people by bicycle. So that very ambitious goal, a goal that no other U.S. city has reached, implies some really concrete actions in terms of transforming our infrastructure and building out the capacity of our mass transit system very rapidly. While cars and trucks and reducing the number of cars and trucks remains our focus, like I said in the intro, we're also one of the largest transit operators in the country. And that means that we need to get diesel out of our fleet. Now, the nice thing about San Francisco is about half of our buses run on electricity, on overhead wires, on electricity that's actually produced by hydroelectric dams up in the Sierra. So it's really carbon free. But the other half historically is run on diesel. And we've committed to getting all diesel out of our bus system by 2025. We're already deploying battery hybrids throughout the diesel electric hybrids throughout our transit network that are able to run emission free even when there are no overhead wires. And I think that is going to be the trend. That's what you're going to see in major U.S. cities that are really concerned not just about their carbon footprint, reducing cars and trucks on the road, but also the local impacts of diesel, especially on environmental justice communities, of which we have several in San Francisco. And then one last thing I wanted to add is that we've had kind of a perverse situation in California for many years whereby cities that want to do the right thing build more affordable infill housing in the urban core where there's great mass transit and where people can walk and bike to get to their destinations, have often find themselves tripped up by our state's environmental review laws, which mandate that the impact of development and the impact of transforming infrastructure and streets into more transit-friendly uses. The way you analyze and measure that is by studying traffic level of service, which is basically a metric of traffic congestion. 2 years ago, our city was one of the first cities in California to reject that, to say that we're no longer considering traffic congestion to be environmental impact. The way we're going to study that instead, and the way we're going to make decisions about where we house people and how we organize our precious public space on the streets, is to measure the number of vehicle miles traveled, the number of cars and trucks that development either puts on the road or takes off the road. And that's a whole level up in the way we think about using data to reduce the amount of traffic in the city and the carbon footprint of the transportation system.
Thank you. Alicia, I think you're up next.
Oh, thanks, Laurel. Yeah, like a couple of the other panelists said, first of all, data has informed our mission. And there's a very good study that came out a few years ago. In the case of the U.S., believe it or not, has nearly 1 in 2 pregnancies among American women is unintended. So there was a study looking at if a couple were to do all of the things that we know to do to reduce our emissions, how does that compare to choosing to have one fewer child? And it turns out that choosing to have one fewer child is going to have a greater impact than everything else that a couple could do, installing solar or taking public transit, reducing waste, et cetera, all of that combined. So that's in the US context where we have high emissions per person, but I think that that's really important to keep in mind. And I use the word choosing, very deliberately. We're talking about free choice, but it is something that couples should think about. And like I said, in the US, a lot of it has to do with, because of the high numbers of unintended pregnancies, we know that there are things that can work to improve couples' access to methods and information to be able to achieve their desired family size. So the other data that we've used to help inform our work is from the Sahel. So in this region, if you look at, so we're talking about countries like Senegal, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, et cetera, all the way over to Ethiopia and Eritrea. Most of our work is in the Francophone part of the region, but these are countries with low contraceptive prevalence rates. So very low use of especially modern contraception and low use of traditional contraception as well. Especially in the heart of the Sahel, like Niger, Chad, and Burkina Faso and Mali, women have very, very little decision-making power over their lives. So there are ways to quantify this, actually, like if a woman can leave the house without permission, if a woman has control over household resources, if a woman can refuse sex. So On the other hand, what I think is a good opportunity is the data that we have about unmet need for family planning. So that's an indicator that says, asks women, do you want to have a child within the next 2 years? And if they do not want to be pregnant or have a kid in the next 2 years, but are not using any contraceptive method, then we say that they have an unmet need for family planning. It's not a perfect data point, but it's quite useful. So in the Sahel region, on average, for every current user, for every current modern contraceptive user, there are 2 to 3 times as many women who say that they want to either space or stop having children, but they're not using any method. So for us in the family planning world, that's a huge opportunity. There's also a huge opportunity to keep girls in school, which delays marriage and has effects on fertility in addition to all of the other benefits that come from educating girls. So that's a bit about how we've used data to help shape our work. What we're trying to do now in the Sahel, for instance, is really understand what's going to work for girls and women. So what's going to work to keep girls in school and delay marriage and delay childbearing, and what's going to work to help women separate having sex from having children if they so desire. So in other words, what's going to work to increase the contraceptive prevalence rate. And there's still a lot of unknowns on that latter part. So our goal is to try to give girls and women what they want, and we use data in various ways to help achieve that.
Is your data primarily collected through surveys, or what's the primary form there?
Yeah, so some of the indicators that I just mentioned are mostly collected by the demographic and health surveys that are implemented every, I don't know, maybe 5 years or so in developing countries. And in the Sahel, we're doing both a formative research and operations research. So we have some really talented ethnographic researchers on our team, and they're looking at questions about, for example, in women's empowerment. So how do women in rural Niger, for instance, understand empowerment? Do they have this concept? What does an empowered woman look like? And what are the pathways to get there? For the girls, the data regarding age of marriage for adolescent girls, this is from northern Nigeria, and now we're gathering it in Niger. It's this part of the same ethnic group that was separated by a colonial border years ago, but that data can come from, we're taking it from the schools as well as
Thank you. It sounds like you got a little
there's some action in downtown Berkeley this evening.
So finally, Steve, I heard you throw out quite a few statistics. So I know that data plays a big part of the work that you do as well. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Laurel. I mentioned before some of the customers that we deal with on a daily basis, and just some background to the data piece. These are really busy kitchens with a lot of moving parts and with different needs. And so to be successful, we need to communicate the value of the product on the process, and we need to make food waste tracking easy for them, because that is what leads to the data capture, right? So the first thing that we do is educate. We make the connection to the scale of the global food waste challenge, and we show the value in tracking food waste. We also make it safe to focus on food waste through measurement. So we create an environment where tracking all of the excess food in the operation is the expectation. It's the norm to be learned from, and not a case of where individuals will be blamed, right? So that's really important. We provide a suite of hardware and software solutions according to the need of those locations, be it bench scales with camera technology, or floor scales, or mobile units, and even a post-consumer product as well. So we educate the frontline food service workers on how to track their food waste. We make it easy, and our analytics program provides myriad ways to slice the data that we collect and to analyze it for change. So we're energizing a workforce, we're creating a culture of food waste prevention, and we're facilitating, once we create that culture, we naturally serve as a portal to downstream recovery efforts too, such as donation of food for human consumption. or animal feed or composting. So we're really facilitating holistic approaches that optimize food resources. So specific to data, data is really at the heart of everything we do at Leanpath. We live by the Drucker mantra, which is what you measure, you manage, right? We know the kitchens have food waste. We help them take control of it through measurement and data. Our tracking tools capture the critical data related to each food waste transaction really in seconds. So that's, the type of food, time of day, the loss reason, the weight and the cost, the disposition code, where that food is going. Is it going to donation? Is it going to compost? Is it going to the trash? And all that data is immediately transferred to the cloud, where it's stored in our analytics program, which is Leanpath Online. The dashboard that we provide allows clients to get extremely granular with that data. So it provides a wealth of opportunities to analyze that for any specific time period while drilling down into multiple categories. So clients can quickly view their total food waste per period, waste by day of the week, top wasted food, top loss reasons, the categories of food waste. They can easily see the trends in their food waste over time, where the food went, waste by time of day. They can see the participation levels for people, food service workers in the kitchen, who's tracking, who's not. And they can easily view total food waste avoided in terms of weight and waste, and also environmental equivalencies, right? Greenhouse gas emission impact, water impact, that sort of thing. So all this is customized to the appropriate units of measure for customers, be it pounds or kilos, or the relevant currency, dollars, euros. We have detailed graphs, pie charts, we have drill down capability, and all that data can be exported as needed as well. So our system generates multiple reports for our clients, and we even provide notes that chefs can use for stand-up meetings in their daily operations. We have alert features, a really cool feature where chefs can receive immediate notification of a specific item that is being tracked, perhaps an expensive item like lobster or filet mignon, so that they can intervene and have a real-time conversation to not only repurpose that food into some other meal, perhaps, but also to discuss, in a positive way, how to prevent that overproduction from occurring in the future, because obviously it's expensive. So we build in reward features to maintain engagement. And for locations that have multiple sites, clients can view all of this data at the enterprise level as well. So the point is that data yields the insights that can drive the operational changes in food service and change long-term behavior as well, so clients can prevent food waste going forward. So measurement really at the heart of our work. One of the things that I love about our system is that for every transaction, the user sees the financial cost of that particular case right on the tracker. And we also extend that cost over the course of the year, so that person can say to themselves, wow, if this transaction occurred every day for the year, here's what it would cost. And that gets to be a big number in a hurry. It's very impactful. And we also show the environmental metrics associated with that too. So it's really impactful. It really gets people thinking about preventing food waste on a daily basis and what they can do to do that. As part of the process, we establish a baseline level of food waste, which is really based on a consistent period of activity, say 3 to 4 weeks. And then we constantly measure against that baseline level going forward. So clients have a continued view of their food waste reduction over time. And as I said, they can analyze that data in myriad ways.
That's really interesting. That I had no idea the sort of the level of granular detail that you can get into with those food waste metrics. You said two things that I thought were really interesting. One is manage what you measure what you, or other way around. You manage what you measure, and it was something we definitely live by at Global Footprint Network. So we're on the same page there. But I think the other thing that you said that I thought was interesting is that we are giving this information as a tool as a benchmark. It's not to say you should have 0. It's just a place to start from. And I think that that's an important thing to think about as we think about how we approach a lot of these issues. Because it's, one of the challenges is how hard it is to change. And if we are guilting people immediately with with data, or they see a message that is a guilt message rather than a purely data message, and that can be an off-putting thing. Anyway, that's one of the challenges that we've run into, and so I think it's an interesting overlap. But speaking of challenges, let's talk about the main challenges that each of you runs into in terms of the work that you do specifically. And for the sake of time, let's keep to the number one challenge you see in your work. And this time, let's start with you, Tom.
Well, I think the number one challenge that almost anybody who's trying to transform the way we get around cities is the fact that most of our cities in the US are built around the automobile. And even in a city like San Francisco, where we do give people a lot of options, we still have far too many trips being made by car in many cases, because the person making the trip doesn't really feel like they've got a good alternative. So that built environment that we've created over the last 50 years is really working. We're working against that, and it's not helped by the fact that a city like San Francisco and like many other big U.S. cities, we're experiencing rapid growth right now. We need to find a way to tell a credible story to our constituents, the people who live in our city, that we can continue to grow while reducing the number of cars on our streets, and we can continue to repurpose our infrastructure towards more sustainable ways of getting around, and finding that balance between offering as many choices as possible, setting the right incentives, and then ultimately making the hard choices about our precious public space is our challenge.
The long-lasting aspect of infrastructure is a huge challenge, and definitely a reason why the actions that we take now are so important.
That's right.
So how about you, Alicia? What would you say is your number one challenge?
I'm going to say two, but very quickly. Number one is just the fact that if the average American woman, which we do, wants to have 2 children, then she will spend about 5 years of her reproductive life either trying to get pregnant, or breastfeeding, where she's not, at risk of an unintended pregnancy. So an average American woman will spend about 5 years not fertile and 30 years fertile. So the challenge is to enjoy those 30 years without having unintended pregnancies. That's the US context. Globally, I think that a major challenge I would cite is that population is a very serious issue. It's also about sex. So people are afraid to talk about it because of this population bomb that came out a long time ago, and not all of the predictions therein were proven true. People don't see it as still an issue, but the population explosion is still real. The global population is growing by over 80 million people a year. That's like adding a new Germany every year. And we know what to do to slow that. But because of the issue of sex, and because of this either fear of talking about population, there's just not a lot of visibility around the issue. And a lack of visibility also means a lack of funding. So about 1% of overseas development assistance is going for family planning.
It's incredible how challenging it is to talk about population. And I think that there has been a historical way that that's been done that has been really detrimental to sustainability overall, because it's come from a pretty unfortunate place in many cases. So I'm really glad that the work that you're doing and the work that Project Drawdown has done has been so focused on women and girls and empowerment and education, because I think that that's a huge aspect of how to talk about this in a really empowering way, rather than some of the unsavory ways that it's been talked about in the past.
Yeah, but I will say that while there have been some really terrible coercive family planning policies and programs, there are a lot more examples of voluntary family planning policies and programs that have been effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thank you. All right, so then I think that's just Alicia. Steve, that means you're up next. What's your number one?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to take a cue from Alicia and just quickly talk about two. And one of them is probably the obvious one that most people think about. And cost is always a factor in any business offering. So we need to demonstrate our value proposition to clients by saving them money, which we do. So, and it's not, I wouldn't say that it's not overwhelmingly just let her call it the investment. It's really just making it visible, right? The people that we're working with, people in the kitchens who, the cost of savings that we generate fall through to the bottom line, and they might not feel like they see that or have control over it, whereas maybe the finance person, sees it more clearly, right? So it's making those cost savings visible. And the second piece is habits and mindsets, right? It's the behavior change piece, right? Food waste has long been the elephant in the kitchen, right? We often talk about it this way. It's excessive, but it's been tolerated due to this culture of abundance that we have around food. And due really to the ease with which we can dispose of it, right, and replace it. So changing behaviors in the kitchen, valuing food, and pointing to the importance of tracking and measurement to save it, to prevent it going forward. Things.
I mean, habits and mindsets are definitely huge, and I think that's probably true for all of us in the different work that we do. To a certain extent, but certainly food where it's so personal.
Sure.
All right, Emily, what would you say is your #1 challenge?
So just a quick few. Clean energy is just technology development is inherently difficult. It is a long time to perfect a clean energy technology, 10 to 20 to 30 years, long sales cycles, really uncertain regulatory path for these people trying to develop the technology. And of course, the very old incumbent industry, oil and gas, that with some exceptions is reluctant to change. So it makes investing in the space difficult, and it makes it has resulted in a lack of capital in the space, which of course is what Powerhouse is trying to do differently, which is to offer that early stage capital in the space.
Yeah, no, that's a big one, and it's important that there are opportunities for these entrepreneurs to find funding, and so it's exciting that folks like you exist in that space. So I think we lost Tom. So finally, my last official question for you all is, after we talk about all these hard things, it's always nice to come back to something that we see in our work that's exciting and gives us a little faith and confidence in your efforts. So I would like each of you to give me an example of one of those success stories, something that helps you day after day see that there's maybe some light at the end of the tunnel. So Alicia, how about you go first this time?
I would love to. So the example is from northern Nigeria, from Kaduna State, where the OASIS initiative, along with the Center for Girls Education, which has been operating there for over 10 years, has succeeded in developing a model of this safe space clubs, mentored clubs for adolescent girls, that has been hugely successful in helping the girls transition from primary school to secondary school, which is where most girls fall out. So we've quadrupled the rates of transition to secondary school. And compared to the statewide data, the girls who participate in these safe space clubs on average are married at 2.4 years later. So you can imagine 2.5 years in an adolescent girl's life is huge and can mean the difference between whether or not she dies or survives childbirth. So that's fantastic. And having been to Zaria and Kaduna State a few times now, I would just say you can see the girls when they start the program, they'll kind of cover their face with their scarves. They'll be, shy to look you in the eyes or speak in a voice that can be heard. And after about a half a year in this program, the girls are confident, they're proud, they are eloquent, and even, advocating now with the governor of the state, and they've successfully eliminated school fees for girls in secondary school.
That is extraordinary. It's a little overwhelming too, to think that's the things that we take so for granted, but that's an extraordinary story. Thank you. Steve, can you talk about a success story in your work?
Yeah, to me, it's just about a few things together. First, it's about our innovation. So we invented automated food waste tracking for the food service sector a number of years ago. And second, our growth. We've grown this business steadily since 2004 to the point that we're in 33 countries and all 50 states now, and that's really exciting. But along the way, what's really exciting too is that we've developed so many wonderful partnerships with sustainability-minded people in leading organizations, and it's extremely rewarding to be the trusted product that enables them to make their commitments to cutting food waste in accordance with Target 12.3 of the SDGs. Organizations like Sodexo and Aramark, big companies making big commitments, and so really exciting to be a part of that. And just we've been recognized with a number of awards in the last couple of years, and as a result of that work with those partners, and that's just been really special too. So a really exciting time in the food waste space, a really important problem, and really just energizing to be part of the team that is addressing it.
It's exciting to see the scale of that. I mean, when you're talking about these big providers and these big companies, you get to see big impact. That's definitely exciting.
Absolutely.
Emily, can you talk a little bit about another success story that you've been privy to?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, in the space we work in, where a success story is just like at a macro level, that the cost of solar and wind and storage has decreased dramatically in the last 10 years, which means that, all of these many people who have been working in this industry for so long are now seeing that clean energy is a reality, and in many geographies it is cheaper than coal-powered plants. So that is certainly exciting and inspirational. Also, of course, we have over 1 million cumulative electric vehicles on the road. So while we need to work on the clean generation piece of transportation, electrification of transportation, it's still really exciting to see the uptick in EVs and all the major OEMs committing to all electric vehicles like the Nissan Leaf, Chevy Bolt, Tesla, among others. At Powerhouse, though, what's most inspiring, of course, is that we get to work with incredible entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis who are taking huge personal and financial risk to start companies in the space. So one exciting example is that one of our companies, Spark Meter, while still early, soon to be success story, has created a sensor and wireless mesh network where they're basically enabling new connections to people in emerging markets to electricity on the tens of thousands they're operating in 20 countries already. So as you can imagine, not only are they deploying clean energy, mostly clean energy through their technology, but they're also changing people's lives by giving them access to electricity for the first time, which has a whole host of implications for the quality of their life and the trajectory of their lives. So yeah.
That's beautiful. It's extraordinary because from the big to the little, and there's amazing things happening, and those stories would keep me going every day, and they do. All of these stories are the things that keep us doing this hard work. So last of all, but not least of all, Tom, can you speak about a success story, something that's giving you confidence in your efforts day after day?
Well, I think like the other panelists, I'm inspired and heartened by both things at the, I guess what we call our industry-wide scale, as well as some local things. At the industry-wide scale, I think we've seen over the last 10 years a revolution in the way we think about transportation, and specifically the way we think about city streets. So, when I started my career, which wasn't that long ago, we were primarily focused on moving as much traffic as possible, reducing traffic congestion, and seeing that as our goal as traffic engineers and transportation planners. And that's really changed in most major U.S. cities and most global cities. Now we focus on livability, sustainability, minimizing the impact of all the transportation modes that are using our public space. And it's been a sea change in the way we think about streets. Just like we've heard from the other speakers, changes in the way we think about food and power and population. Locally, I've been really proud and excited that the last 2 years have been the 2 safest years in the history of San Francisco. We've lost fewer people on our streets in 2017 and 2018 than any other year on record since the dawn of the motor age in San Francisco. And so those are we still lost 20 people in each of those years, and each of those lives are precious. We know that the investments we're making, the new way we're thinking about streets in our transportation system, and the data-driven approach we're taking to transforming very rapidly the way we get around our cities is a success, and hopefully an example to other cities around the world.
That's fantastic. I am thrilled that we have these incredible success stories in the private sector, in the public sector, in the nonprofit and sort of civil society sector. I mean, I think for us, it comes down to we're all working towards these bigger goals of sustainability, and I feel like it takes all of us. And so it's fantastic to get to see all of the different ways that happens, and how important it is that it is happening on all of these different fronts. So I think we have just a few more minutes to take a couple of questions that we got online prior to the webinar. So the first one I have here says, greetings from Colombia, South America. The smart grid concept is becoming the best solution to shape our future cities. What do you think will be the key topics in the development of this technology? And I think maybe Emily, this might be for you.
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Sure. So it's referring to the smart grid concept, and as a best solution to shape our future cities. So what do you think will be key topics in the development of this technology?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different topics and technologies that are addressing the future connected smart grid. A couple interesting areas and points to think about. So of course, grid infrastructure in the US and old grid infrastructure is stagnant, it's dumb, it's manually operated, and as we move towards a smart grid, there are all sorts of technologies that have been developed or are in development that are creating advanced sensors and controls and retrofits, and then of course the software that overlays all of that, so that ideally we can optimize the flow of electricity so that it is bidirectional and that it can be deployed where it is needed when it is needed. So a lot of technology and various technology development is focused on basically matching the demand for electricity with the supply of electricity. And there are all sorts of different technology takes on how we might retrofit the old grid in order to do so. Of course, in emerging markets where grids are still for the first time being developed, this also presents a huge opportunity because we can, in those markets, totally reimagine with this new smart connected technology what a grid might look like that is bidirectional, that is where you can automate the flow of electricity to meet supply and demand when it's needed. So that's also really exciting. And I think, from a policy standpoint, we're now, especially in the US, trying to figure out for the first time, where we have this smart grid and we have these empowered consumers who for the first time have solar in their house, they have an electric vehicle, they have a battery, and they may be actually selling electricity back to their utility or back to the grid. How do we redefine electricity rate structure that allows for these new distributed and empowered consumers that are integrating with the smart grid? So those are just a couple things to think about. It's certainly really exciting to imagine what a future grid might look like, both in the US and Europe, but also in some of these emerging markets in Africa and Southeast Asia.
Very exciting stuff happening. That's fantastic. Thank you, Emily. So we have another question here, and this one looks like is on food waste. So public school systems food waste is billions. I'm not sure what, but and then the plastics that are used that contain the food go into the ocean that is also servicing billions of students. So how can we solve this crisis? So I don't know if that, I think that might, maybe we could get a couple of thoughts on that. But Steve, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, public schools a really important place. It's an important question. One of my most powerful personal experiences in the 10 or 11 years that I've been involved in food waste in detail was visiting a period of the waste bird. Very disturbing. There are many examples of opportunities to reduce overproduction that day, passing out food that wasn't, going to be eaten, opportunities to donate, opportunities to recycle and compost. A lot of plastic going directly to landfill and hopefully not oceans that day. So it's really critically important to educate our kids. These are the next generation of leaders, right? To properly value food. We have a colleague, Jonathan Bloom, who's done a lot of work in this space and points out that in many ways, he believes that we're reinforcing food waste behavior in schools and not food waste reduction behavior. And we need to flip that. An important part about that is, if we can do a good job of that, kids are really good educators of their parents, right? They bring those thoughts home and they can pass those lessons on. So we're missing an opportunity there. But I'd say a couple things. It's really critical to get food waste education in the schools, and it's critical to bring a measurement focus and a focus on prevention with support for recovery efforts too. And I would do this just as we do at Leanpath, right? I would present the business case and really more as this is an investment in our future. It's an investment in our kids. So I'd present the financial case, communicating that to the schools, and then communicating the educational and social benefits that will accrue, right? This is the generation that's going to be fully faced with the challenge of 2050, right? So we need to get them educated and on a path to dealing with those challenges now.
Absolutely. That sounds fantastic. We could put you on that. We'll be good to go.
Got it.
So I think we have maybe one more question, but I kind of out of time, but I really liked this question that got sent in, that how can we balance sustainability with ensuring that the needs of all people today and in the future are met? I think this is such an important question. It could be a whole webinar topic in and of itself. But for me, the short answer is that the whole point of sustainability, all of the work all of us are doing, is to ensure that the needs of all people are met. If we're not, that's not sustainability. So not addressing sustainability is a sure way to exacerbate social injustice and inequity. And I think you can see that in all of our work, whether it's transportation or food waste or population or energy. These are all inextricably linked and a very important part of why we do the work that we do. So thank you for that question as well. But I think that's about all the time we have left. We have managed to only go over by a few minutes, but I want to give a huge thank you to the panelists, Alicia, Steve, Emily, Tom. You guys have been fantastic. It's been amazing to hear the stories of the work that you're doing. And we are definitely excited that you were able to share those with us and get a chance to talk to each of you today.
Thank
So-
you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I would also like to give a big thanks to everyone who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I would also say that before we sign off, for those of you who are interested, the new National Footprint and Biocapacity 2019 results are all available now on data.footprintnetwork.org. Please go check them out. We're proud of the work that we've done this year, and we're excited that they are that's out in the world today. And finally, stay tuned. Our 2019 Earth Overshoot Day campaign will launch June 5th. So watch this space for ways that you can hear about even more ways that we can all work together to move the date of Earth Overshoot Day. Thank you all so much.
Great, thank you.
All right.